G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I've got a topic that's a little bit controversial, but I think it's really important to discuss, and that is BIM salaries in the AEC industry, so the architecture, engineering and construction industry. I'm going to focus predominantly on the architecture industry and just briefly delve into engineering as well, assuming that's my specialty. But please note that all opinions I'm expressing here are my own, and a lot of these come from personal experience and talking to other people. So don't take them as facts, but I think that should be a good guideline for maybe what you should start considering when you're looking at your salary or your future roles. So this is all my opinion. And I'm really mostly just looking at Australia down under. So this may not be applicable to your country, but it might give you an idea of what's out there, or maybe it might even motivate you to want to work in Australia, because we have a really great economy. We're very lucky in Australia, and I think we have a very fair working market as well, compared to some other countries that I've discussed with people through my channel. I'll put some numbers at the end of what I think fair salaries are. If you want to just see these, feel free to skip to the end, because I know some people just want to know what they think a fair salary is. But I've made this a video for maybe three main reasons. Firstly, I want you to know your worth. You need to understand what you're worth in your market, and also personally to yourself, because a lot of people just don't know their worth. They either don't value themselves enough, or they overvalue themselves and don't get the job they want. It's also good to know your growth options or pathways if you're working in BIM, because it's very unclear to begin with in BIM where your destination is. Are you going to be a BIM manager? Are you going to be a consultant? Are you going to be a web developer? There's so many options. So I'll sort of discuss those as well. As well as this, I just want you to understand your market as well. Have a more realistic outlook, especially if you're in Australia, on what fair salaries are and what growth pathways should be. So BIM roles. It's not really a big piece of the pie. It's probably smaller than what's here. Imagine these three things are just the whole AEC industry. It's probably even smaller that there's non-users that don't even touch BIM. Like project managers typically don't use BIM. A lot of builders won't either. They're more managing people. And then you've got users, and these are just people that anyone that even touches BIM at all. Even if you open up BIM 360, for example, just to view a model, I classify you as a BIM user in this case. And then you've got what I call dedicated roles. This is really what I'm focusing on today. So these are people that would spend a majority of their time interfacing with BIM modeling platforms. So these are things like BIM managers, model managers, BIM technicians, and specialists. So I'm going to focus just on this today. So if you're a non-user, you're not really going to get a lot of idea of salary from this video. I'm not really going to talk about what an architect should be paid or what a project manager should be paid, because it's not really my field of expertise. So I'm just going to look at some market reports to begin with, because there's some good reliable market sources to give you an idea of maybe what the benchmarking is. But it's important to note that these reports are based entirely on the data they collect. So they're not usually going to get people that are right at the bottom of the spectrum or right at the top. It's usually focused more around the middle of the market. So I'm looking at the Hayes report from 2019 to 2020. And first we're looking just at architecture here. The two main things I want to point out in their report, because there's a lot of information here, is that on average, BIM or CAD managers, based on what they're recruiting and also who they're talking to, are making between $75,000 to $140,000 a year, Australian dollars. Now that's a pretty wide range. It's very hard to know what your worth is when the spread of salary on average is $70,000. That's a big spread, and I know people making less and more than this in those roles. So it's even bigger than that technically when you talk to your peers, if they tell you their salary, which is also quite hard to do. People don't like to share the numbers per se. As well as this, you can see BIM technicians can also make anywhere between $45,000 to $100,000 on average. And again, I know technicians that are making more than $100,000 as well, although it's far less common. So again, it's a huge spread. It's almost 50% of the spread is basically the range on average. It's almost double. So you have so much room to move in terms of negotiating your salary. If you look at engineering, it's similar again in terms of the range and also the size of the range versus the minimum. So you can see here CAD managers, and I don't really like that they've used the term CAD manager and CAD technician. It sort of shows the old-fashioned mentality that engineering is still trying to break in terms of getting away from 2D workflows into 3D BIM models. But I know a lot of people using BIM in engineering, and they would never let themselves be called these names. So maybe just to assume it's BIM manager, BIM technician. But again, the CAD managers make a little bit less on average, which surprises me, because on average engineers tend to get paid a bit more on jobs. because they're taking on a lot of risk and a lot of expertise as well. And the CAD technicians are making about the same again. There's a tighter spread, but it starts a bit lower. And I do know this is true. I do know that engineering drafters do tend to start on a lower salary, and they have to climb a lot harder than architects do sometimes. But what about BIM coordinators or BIM specialists? These roles aren't listed here, so it's not specific enough. So I looked around and just saw some different sources. So first, let's just establish a hierarchy of BIM roles. So in my opinion, this is pretty much the way that I classify BIM users or BIM specialists in their field. So I usually start off with BIM technicians or BIM drafters. These are people that are probably in their first 3 to 4 years of their career, or maybe they've advanced into becoming a specialist. They're typically doing things like documentation, base modeling, so they'll be starting the main model and maintaining it throughout its life, but they typically won't be managing a team of people. Usually they'll be someone either being managed or not requiring a manager through their experience. Typically they'll also be doing things like detailing on the project as well. But if we move up another band, and again, I'm not saying this is a better role, it's just usually the progression people follow in their career if they're focusing on BIM. The second role is the BIM coordinator, or you might hear it called model manager sometimes, but I'm seeing more and more that people are calling this a BIM coordinator role, because typically what you'll be doing is coordinating the project from a BIM perspective. So you'll be doing things like consulting the BIM management plan to make sure that everything's up to standard. You'll be doing things like model audits to make sure the model's working, but you will be doing technical things as well. So there's a bit of overlap between the technical and the coordinator role here, but I find that this makes up a majority of the BIM marketplace. And BIM coordinators tend to be highly desired from what I've seen as well. This seems to be the most common role that people can't seem to get enough of, because everyone's either just starting off or they want to go past this role. Above that is probably your typical BIM manager role. So this is where you're across multiple projects, or you're managing the office standards across one office or multiple offices. And there's a smaller portion, I think, of the industry that makes up this role, but there are still a lot of them, and you hear from more of them because most of them are quite socially active on things like Twitter and LinkedIn because they're doing pretty advanced work they want to share. And at this point, you're also getting more involved in the marketing of your company as well. So you're much more tied into how the company grows, typically as well. So I say that this is a pretty important role as well, and typically you'll need to work your way up to this role through these previous 2 roles to get there, which is what I did, for example. Sometimes you'll hear this called a CAD manager or a design technology coordinator, even an IT manager, sometimes I see it called. In my opinion, it's just BIM manager. If you're doing BIM, you're managing BIM. And on the end, or almost off to the side, it's not even really necessarily a growth pathway to get here, is what I call the specialists. So these are people that may not even work inside a company. They might be consultants or contractors, but typically they've got a niche. They've got something they do very well, or they've got a wide range of things they do very well, and they don't want to be locked into one company. They want to help multiple companies out. Maybe they'll make more money. Maybe they'll make twice what they could make as a BIM manager, because they can do twice the amount of work that you might get through in a slow period in a company. As well as this, you might see things like web developers, Python coders, C++ coders. This is an emerging paradigm, which I would lump into BIM specialists as well. But let's look at BIM coordinator. So from the website payscale.com, which I find to be relatively reliable and accurate from my experience, they're saying here the average salary for a BIM information modeling coordinator is about $75,000, and I found this roughly to be true. I will go through some numbers at the end from my experience, which is just a tiny bit different, but you can see again a very wide spread, from all the way from 50 to 100,000. It's a wide range, and it's almost down to what I'd call a BIM technician salary. So that this lends to another topic that I might cover separately, which is the big differences between a BIM technician and a good BIM model manager. Because I find sometimes that a model manager is really just a really good technician. They don't understand the intricacies of managing a model or managing a team that's in BIM. So I think that that's probably a topic for another day, but it does reflect that there is that sort of grayness between what a technician and a coordinator is. As well as this, I went to Indeed.com, which is also relatively reliable. They do get a little bit less data, so it's harder to find, but they do get more anomalies, so things at either end of the spectrum. And in this one, you can see that BIM modelers, which covers both technicians and coordinators, essentially everything below management, is an average salary of $95,000. So it's really different. So I mean, what I find on average is that the statistics, they vary wildly. So it can be really confusing for someone trying to find out their worth if they look at market research. So I'll try and help you out and give you some insight from what I've experienced. But because it's also true, in the real world, salaries do vary wildly. I know some people that are getting paid half of what someone else is for the exact same role in the same size company, and there's some really key reasons for this. So I guess we have to ask, why is this the case? So the first thing is, you need to know your worth, and obviously add tax on the salary you want to, so you get the money you want, but know what you're worth. How do you value your skills? So how far down your career growth pathway are you? You need to be very realistic with this. You need to know yourself, not only professionally, but also personally. How emotionally mature are you in, say, a business meeting? You need to assess how far down many pathways in your career you are, and you need to place a number to that. So, you might think you're worth only 50 grand when really you might be worth like $120,000 a year easily. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you're a volatile member of a team and you actually do more damage than good. So just have a think about where you place yourself in your emotional growth and your professional growth. And don't be a super tech. So this is a really big trap, I find, for people that want to become a BIM manager or a BIM model manager. They try to become really, really, really good at a piece of software instead of becoming better as a manager. So I think it's really important to be good at the software, but at the same time, it's also to be good at delegating and helping other people grow in using the software as a technician. So try not to fall in this trap. And I guess the big thing for me, you have to be a good negotiator. Most people I meet don't know how to negotiate well, or they're too scared to negotiate in the first place. They'll just put one number on the table, and if they say no, they freak out and they take the next number they're given. That's not how negotiation works. Hold to your number. If you know what you're worth, don't go below it. You can walk away, but have goals. So make sure that you know where on this sort of spectrum of your career you sit. So have a plan. Where do you want to be in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years? Maybe you're not even on this spectrum in the next 10 years. Maybe you've got your own company. Maybe you're not even measuring yourself in a company by then. Maybe you're not even working in architecture. So have a plan, have goals, communicate them clearly enough that the company you interview with knows where you want to go, because they might value you more highly if they know that you're set on management in the next 5 years. They'll go, okay, this person's enthusiastic. We need a BIM manager eventually, so maybe they'll pay you more to incentivize you to stay. But make sure you have people skills as well. This is so important. I've noticed, especially in my generation and newer generations, we're not coming out with as strong people skills as people in generations above, say, the 30 to 35-year-old bracket have. These people have grown up in business and corporate environments without technology to change how they've had to operate. We're getting very focused on tech and software and coding, and whilst that's all good, we still need to work with people. So I think it's really important to still focus on your people skills, and make sure that when you interview or you put in a resume, make it really obvious what your people skills are, because these are really important, as well as just being able to operate a program. It's very hard to teach someone good communication skills over a technical skill. And stay technology literate, so keep up to date. So make sure that you know what the new things are, what's changing, what's not relevant anymore, and keep up to date. A lot of architects I work with, they're not up to date with technology. They're still doing things the way they've done them for the last 10 years. And as a result, your career doesn't tend to grow if people can see that you're not growing as well. And do your research. This is so important. So make sure that you always research your market. You talk to your peers, you understand what everyone's expectations and goals are, because it lets you benchmark yourself against your peers, which are often your competition as well, technically. So make sure you do your research. And you can walk away. If you go to an interview and you're not going to get what you want to get paid, don't just take on a job that's going to underpay you, because eventually you'll get frustrated and you'll probably quit. So make sure that you just know what you're worth, and don't be afraid to walk away like a boss. But at the same time, don't burn bridges. I've met a lot of people that burn their bridges when they walk away. They'll say something very offensive or out of line and go, oh, you don't respect me, you're not paying me what I want. You have no idea, and you don't want to do that. It's a waste of time, and word spreads in your industry. People might even know that you're a hard person to work with or a hard person to employ. So never burn bridges. Always try to go in the most professional way possible, and don't shut doors either. Maybe say, oh, right now, maybe we're not lining up in what we want right now, but maybe something will change in the future, and feel free to let me know if it does, and I'll let you know if I find anyone that suits the role for what you're looking for in the meantime. Make it a professional exit. So I guess probably the part that most of you want to hear is what do I think are fair salaries for each role. So I want to stress again, this is my opinion from personal experience. I've been lucky enough to talk to a lot of people in my career who've told me what they're getting paid. So I know roughly what the realistic spread of salaries is. I've also had enough time to form my opinion on what a fair salary is. So fair isn't always the same as good. Fair is what I think people deserve, and good is maybe getting above that. So in this case, it's fair. So BIM technicians. So I think that most BIM technicians should not usually be paid less than about $60,000 in Sydney in Australia. Anything less than this, and I find that it's a little bit of an awkward salary that doesn't motivate people to work hard. Because there are other industries you can go in and just jump straight in on, $70,000, $80,000. Architecture, if you jump in on, 40 grand or 50 grand, you're barely scraping in the minimum pay scale. So I think it's really important to start around here, but obviously this is all up to companies. But I wouldn't never pay someone less than that. And I think on average, sorry, for the first 3 years, I expect that most technicians will grow around about between 60 to 80,000, somewhere in that pay scale. Beyond that, if you stick with a technician role, there's not that much room for growth in my opinion. I find most of them don't get up past $100,000. They typically will get somewhere between 80 and 90, and I find after that it sort of peters off a little bit. If you're really good, you can sort of break the mold and go beyond that, but you really need to have something special about you that makes you different. So next one is BIM coordinators. So again, this isn't a role that usually you'll start on. Usually you'll come into this role from being either a technician or a really good architectural or engineering coordinator not using BIM. So I think most people probably enter this somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 depending on their current salary and also how long they've been working at the company or in the industry. I typically wouldn't pay a BIM coordinator less than $70,000 because they're doing quite complicated, risky work. They need expertise. So if you pay them less than this, it's very unlikely they'll feel respected to the point where they want to do a good job, which is really important in the BIM coordinator role. I find on average, most of them don't get past about $100,000 from my experience, unless they push or negotiate. But there's a lot of room to push and negotiate. You need to question, I guess, what point you stop being a coordinator and become a BIM manager. That's a really important transition to identify and communicate to your company, because that's a whole different salary ballgame, in my opinion. But again, there's a lot of growth. If you're a really good coordinator, I know someone more than $150,000 a year. There's not many that I know, but I know it's possible. Again, negotiation. Okay, so probably one of the really important ones people want to know about, BIM managers. So you'll notice here that I've started the scale at $70,000 as well. This is because I do know BIM managers on around about this. Typically more junior, maybe they've only just came out of a technician role and skipped coordinator role entirely. In my opinion, this is wrong. I think every BIM manager should spend at least a year or two as a BIM coordinator. I did it, a lot of other people I know did it, and it made them a much stronger communicator and problem solver as a result. And it gives you the experience in your field that you need. If you're an architectural BIM manager, you should be a good architectural coordinator. You shouldn't just be a good Revit user or a good ArchiCAD user. That's not enough. You need to relate to people with real world problems as a manager. Anyway, so again, there's a lot more room for growth as a BIM manager, I find, because you're part of the company's management system. So you're sitting in a management role, typically a more executive level role, probably not quite, but almost. I'd say between $70,000 to $120,000 is where I find most BIM managers' salaries tend to sit. Especially if they're mid-level, maybe under the age of about 35, I tend to see this be the spread. Beyond that, if you're a good negotiator, you can go probably around about up to 150 is what I've seen. Beyond that, it's a special case. So this might be a national BIM manager that's managing multiple offices, or it could just be a really strong negotiator that's very intrinsic to the company's operations. So I know some BIM managers that are on more than $200,000 a year. Hats off to them, like great salary, obviously. But yeah, at the same time, I know some that should be paid a lot more that don't negotiate, and they sit somewhere down in the 70 to 120K range. On average, most BIM managers I meet are on about 120. That seems to be the middle figure. But again, it's up to negotiation and how much worth you have in the company. And from here, it's just BIM specialists. And this one, I can't really put numbers on it because the roles are all so different. It really comes down to how well you set your client base up if you're a consultant, or it comes down to how how niche what you do is, how desirable it is, because people will pay more for things that no one does. So if you're a web developer, you're probably going to make a lot of money because there's not that many good web developers out there in the AEC industry right now, at least. So it really varies. So thanks for watching, and I guess remember, this is my opinion. Every market is different, but I hope this gives you some insight and maybe some ideas into how you can go about either improving your salary or getting started in the industry or transitioning between roles. So this has been a really common query that people have given me through my email, so I thought it was worth me addressing this topic. And again, I hope I haven't offended or irritated anyone that runs a company. Like, don't feel like you're underpaying your staff if you're not following my guidelines. These are just my opinions. Every company is different. Every company has different overheads to manage, so I totally respect that. So thanks for watching today. Hopefully you found this useful. I make videos about 2 to 3 times a week and should do so for quite a while. So if you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.